Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Data Privacy Party installment. Let's get started. Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome back to the latest installment of the Data Privacy Party install. Back your host, Hunter Sunbeck, as always, coming at you guys now, not from Lakeway, not from Cedar Park, but from Austin. Yeah, I'm sure y'all have noticed we haven't really done a show in a while. So this is me trying to make up for a little bit of lost time. May, June, I can't remember exactly when the last episode was, but glad to be back with y'all again. Don't really have much of a structured show this time around, but gonna kind of be doing a few different things. So kind of break it up first and talking through. So I know we've talked a lot about data privacy legislation over the last several episodes, and so we're going to take a little bit of break. I'll kind of go into Utah's latest artificial intelligence regulation act. So essentially, Utah is one of three states, joined by Colorado and California, that's enacted a new AI sort of regulation, legislation, the bill creating essentially AI Policy Act is what the general description is. So yeah, there's not a ton that I really want to cover as far as data privacy today. So if you're looking forward to that, we can go to the next episode or maybe go back an episode. But today is primarily going to be centered around briefly talking through the Utah Act, uh, mainly because it's the most simple of all the ones that have been introduced lately, in my opinion. And then I got the privilege to attend a panel at the state capitol not too long ago, this past Wednesday. And it was a good panel. Uh, Sorry, they talked about just the title was AI and modernization. So the TSABAA is the organization, this Texas state agency. Um, oh goodness, I can't remember the acronym. Hmm, what on earth? Oh, there, Texas State Agency Business Administrators Association. So they do a lot of things. They serve a lot of the state agencies primarily as their role, as well as some of the connected community. And so part of it is hosting sessions, kind of like the one they had on Wednesday, where they're talking about different things that's going on with emerging technology, data privacy, AI, blockchain, which has kind of lost steam a little bit as AI started to pick it up. But how some organizations are using some of that technology. So we've got to hear from folks from different agencies, as well as someone from Deloitte. So yeah, the Chris Bunker did a great job. As being one of the panel members from Deloitte, talking about his experience on the consulting side of things. And then we had Ann Sellison, the CIO at TxDOT, and Josh Kuntz, the CISO of Texas Department of Licensing and Registration, TDLR. Each of them had interesting things to say. They kind of talked about their opinion on the matter of AI and just bringing systems into a more modern age. I think for a long time, the state governments have always kind of gotten say a bad rap for having sort of outdated technology. And so lately I've been seeing a lot of uh, proposals and other requests that have come in lately of this kind of data modernization approach to things, digital modernization. A lot of paper records need to be brought forward and turned into digital records. And then you can use the information that's on those digital records to kind of feed into your AI systems and train it. So if any of y'all out there, you've used GPT, ChatGPT, maybe Claude, maybe Copilot, several other ones that are similar, kind of those prompt generators. It's, obvious, I think at this point, everyone understands that those are kind of built based off a cortex of data. And the more you feed, the more it learns and the better it becomes. And so generating something like this internally in an organization, I'd be able to ask the firm that I work for, what is our sampling guidance for this population, blah, blah, blah. And then, maybe it says this is the generalization response I can provide. Can you be more specific? What type of project is this? What's the risk level associated with it? What kind of control is it? What's the frequency? Yada, yada, yada. So, as you can see already, using something like that, just a simple prompt generator is able to help me get a better understanding and not need to remember as much of information. So then I can go out and execute based on some simple questions. And I mean, as you ask more of those questions, you just learn because you end up, to a certain degree, probably memorizing the response, which is not the best way to learn. But at the same time, if that's the right answer and you have it memorized, there's no reason to fault you for learning through that avenue. But yeah, I just want to give my raw reaction to what they were talking about and just kind of fill in on some information. This is not necessarily a I guess educational content per se, but this is just what they were saying. So I mean, a lot of to kind of start. You started off talking through implementation steps of those AI models within their organizations. And so a lot of the comments Chris was making primarily towards, AI fluency within the organization, get AI training in-house, or it doesn't necessarily need to be in-house, but get folks with AI knowledge in-house that can help train some of the other ones. This is a big area that he mentioned a couple of times. Um, and hinting on the fact that obviously the more affluent you become with it doesn't have to be just artificial intelligence technology, it can be with anything else as well, just the more aware you are of different risks that it poses to your organization. I mean, obviously the one everyone talks about is you don't know where, using GPT, be careful because we don't know where that information is going. And I mean, yeah, that's definitely the case. And we don't want to be the reasons for a data breach that happens. I mean, if you're listening and just trying to think about the personal risks and implications, it's kind of the same thing. Obviously, they're trying to make sure that the corporation's information is not hunted out there, don't know where it is. I mean, it's no different than using the cloud as or to store data in, to be quite honest. It's just the companies that provide that information do a little bit better, I guess, job to put it, to say the least, that we know of. Your Microsofts, your Oracles, your other larger companies that we kind of trust to be at the cutting edge, maybe not necessarily the bleeding edge, but the cutting edge of some of the security technology. But uh, it was very interesting stuff on here. Anne was talking through some of their first steps is look at what are the use cases for something like that can come in. So obviously for your own personal life, what are ways that you can use it to enhance things? I mean, I know I use it. You can change the tone of the messages you write to people. You can change, wording on certain things that you're trying to do. I mean, it's just there's a number of use cases and uh sorry, I'm distracted right now trying to bring up another document at the moment, but there's a number of different use cases that you can leverage in order to use some of those tools to your advantage and understand what exactly it is that you're doing with that information and how it's being provided to you. Um, yeah, so other areas too. I mean, I think a lot of companies probably get hiccups with as far as governing the AI process. I don't think you need to go so far as necessarily creating a whole new policy unless it's just really, really, it needs to happen. I have a client I do some work for that's created a whole policy around it. Um, we can probably take a step back and say this is no different than any other technology that we've recently brought on board not too long ago. I mean, migrating from hard copy journals into QuickBooks or NetSuite or one of those other accounting softwares. I mean, it's no different than being able to put something like that in place. I mean, using APIs to pass information from one system to the next, batch processing and automating, and what all that has provided as far as automation goes. It's just another technology that should fall under the already created acceptable use policy. It doesn't really need to be something that's brand new necessarily. Um, some interesting examples that were being shared. So, TxDOT is using, they've automated their access management, and some of y'all may be thinking, well, we did that 10 years ago. I don't know why they were so late to the game. It's a little difficult, especially with having so many users and so many different systems, and not having the best in-house folks to be able to do that. A lot of times, the state agencies will have to farm out to consulting firms because they just can't hire the resources. Budgets are tighter, obviously, at that level, and it's not a revenue generator. It's essentially a kind of a cost center to a certain degree, depending on how you look at it. But another is AI powered IT invoicing. So there isn't a way. I think a lot of us are aware of kind of how invoicing can work, how you can automate it. It's supposed to be easy. It may not be all the time, but I think that when you are doing that, you just need to be aware, how is AI set up to make the right payments to the right vendors. I mean, we don't want to have an instance in which we're sending the wrong vendor the wrong information. I mean, I'm sure that we have it set up to where it sends us, specific vendor. Um, that time of the month hits when it's time to send it out, so they're able to send it out if they need to send it out. Now, granted, the state agency is probably not the one invoicing in all certain circumstances, but it's possible. Whenever they go to pay the invoice too, whenever it registers that an invoice has come in from maybe a specific email address or from a specific portal where that information comes in, they can then read where on that invoice the dollar amount is, and send it back to the right spot that it's supposed to go. So essentially automating that. I know that there's an instance in where you'd think, well, what if someone adds an extra zero and we pay out a ton of money? Well, you'd probably build in checks to see that. If the expected amount deviates from a certain degree, it flags it for someone else to kind of provide a manual check before it actually goes through and approves that invoice for processing. You can build it's easy to build stuff in once you kind of understand what those use cases are. So IT, invoicing, for instance, and automating that process. If someone decides to put an invoice in that has an extra zero on it, we can build in a range of expected values. And then once that hits and it's beyond that expected value, then we know, okay, this is something that needs to be reviewed by a person before it gets processed, and they can opt to cancel it. As far as automating the send off process, that one might be a little more difficult, and it depends on how that information gets fed in to send that invoice to the vendor. I know a lot of accounting firms, for instance, you build time into whatever kind of time system to record it, and so you can't exactly. Well, I guess you could. The way the time system works is I'll have to process the invoice myself and send it off, versus it could just automate the send off process. So I set it up at a certain time and day, but there might be certain things that feed into it, like discounted rates. Maybe you eliminate the processing fee for first time client or long time client. You need to modify some text on the invoice. There's certain things that probably need to be changed a little bit, but I think for the most part it can be done to where you can set it up to where it does it automatically. And that'll be a massive time saver at some point down the road for myself and a bunch of others that I know. Um, so that's quite interesting. TDLR is talking about using AI-powered issue identification and ticket creation. So there's probably certain things that folks are already aware of at their own organizations right now. They're doing stuff similar to that. you're using Splunk to monitor for specific cases of inappropriate activity that are occurring on your network, whether it's misuse of credentials or it's anomalous activity, some kind of privilege creep attempt, something to that nature. It can recognize that, automatically create an incident. Splunk kind of already does this already, so I wouldn't call it necessarily AI automated. Um, Now, the part where it comes in, where it's kind of the decision and cognitive approach of the AI model to that, would be um, where the AI model is capable of recognizing what happened in the ticket, records it appropriately, and then it's able to basically solve the issue on its own. So, maybe it recognizes there was an account lockout that had occurred. AI, registers that there were 3, 4 failed attempts, whatever the threshold is for someone, and then it can maybe automatically reach out to this user and said, your account has been locked out. Please click, here, whatever they may have set up to help them down the road. Now, obviously, most cases they'd probably have to call in and have a human interfere in the interaction, but you can kind of set it up. I know that there's one organization I've done work for that they have it set up to where if you do lock yourself out, you can go through a URL, put in your credentials, modify your password from there, and you're good to go. You don't need to interact with a human on that front. Not to say that's one of those tedious tasks as well. They did talk a little bit about job displacement potential, and I mean, I'm on the page of, yeah, obviously there's going to be certain things that get removed, but that's like, I mean, telephone uh desk operators. If y'all have seen Mad Men, there's a great scene in the very beginning of the show where they have these ladies operating one of those telephone, I don't even know the right word for it, but they're just moving the whole time. I mean, it's probably a good, like, you talk about a hard day's work, that's good 8 hours of just, you don't really get a chance to open up your phone and check TikTok or do whatever it is that they did back then. It was going the whole time because calls are coming in so frequently and needing to direct them to, which line it is. Now you essentially have an entirely automated process to be able to call a company and then route through their phone system to get to who you're getting to. It's not a manual process anymore. So, account lockout, that's a simple one. Simple example of where, there's already companies that have implemented stuff to where you don't need to call someone and ask them to unlock your account anymore, reset your password. Essentially do that yourself. There's other instances too, and I don't really know, um, maybe Josh was kind of embellishing a little bit on exactly what they were doing. He didn't go into great detail about it, but it's the simple stuff, I'm sure, that they've gotten to where it's essentially an automated process. And so user tries too many times, locks themselves out, they know how to go and reset their password. It'd be interesting to audit their process and see how well it works. Oh, another big news, y'all. I should have started the episode with this. I'm sure Caitlin's gonna kill me for not saying it, but part of the busy stuff that's been going on over the last couple months is that I ended up getting married. I'm sure those of y'all that listened to the last episode knew that I was engaged, so that did happen, and that's why the background's a little bit different than maybe what you're used to seeing if you're watching on YouTube. Moved into a new place, downtown Austin, no longer north of the wall, as I like to joke, being up in Cedar Park. No longer west of the wall either. When I spent 3 months out in Lakewood with my parents, kind of between um, my brother and his wife moving into the Cedar Park house, and then getting a good lease in place at this spot. So, uh, yeah, overjoyed, and it's great. Highly recommend. Anyone that wants to get married should, but don't do it lightly, of course, because then it'll just be it'll probably be a little more difficult than you think it's going to be. All right. Let's see what else they said that I can take a bite out of today. Um, yeah, I guess I didn't really finish my thought on workforce impact. So, the low skill stuff, no one's getting laid off. You're just gonna get repurposed to do more complicated tasks. That's essentially what everyone wants to do, I think, for the most part. Um, it doesn't make sense to just sit back and hang and do the one job for a very long period of time. There might be something very specific that you are very good at that no one else can do, and therefore you kind of have the ability to do that. However, if um, you're the one doing sort of the more mundane tasks, one, begin getting more fluent in AI. That's the obviously the lingo, using and exploring some tools that are out there to kind of help, as well as also just being able to understand how it's going to impact your own job and what opportunities it's going to lead to. Because chances are, I mean, you're larger, big tech, like they're most of the folks contract based that are doing the tech support and other jobs like that. I mean, you know, I worked at before I'm at the job I am now, I worked at a tech support job at a building and supply company, and we had maybe 8 guys working the phones. And so, uh, those they're not going to get rid of all 8 of those guys. I mean, that's pretty valuable guy folks that have a pretty good head knowledge of a lot of the organization. Now, most of those guys are part-time, so it's pretty easy for them to walk off if they need to. But for those of us that were full time, you know, you start to learn a little bit. You get pretty good at what you're doing, and so eventually you get to the point where you're not being challenged anymore. And so, part of it is to kind of help with those tasks. It just makes your workforce more educated. They can kind of do their responsibilities as well as not have to worry about, you know, getting locked out and having to call the help desk to get unlocked. Help desk role, for those of you that may be listening that are part of it, it's going to change, obviously. It's going to get more, I'll say, interesting, maybe get a little harder depending on what you do. A little more specialized too, potentially. I mean, you're not going to be doing what you already don't do what they were doing 5, 10 years ago. So you're probably not going to be doing the same thing 5 years from now. Usually that's a very entry level role anyway. A lot of people that do that role, it's either manager of that team, director of that team, or you branch off to do something that's a little more specialized, you know, network infrastructure, cybersecurity, IT audit, even consulting, I guess, to a certain degree, uh, you know, server administration, uh, you know, eventually CTO. That's what I think everyone's goal is, right? Less technical, the higher up you go. But yeah, that it's gonna change. I mean, it'll be a little bit more. Maybe it might even be less of a put your nose up at the job and more of a highly sought after role, because it's you're getting to do a lot more with the technology and understanding how it works, rather than being someone that calls in whenever they need your assistance. So, uh, you know, it's not going to have a massive impact. The folks that it impacts are going to be the contract workers, and they're already pretty knowledgeable anyway. So they will be, you know, it's not going to be this massive, you know, super high supply of workers and incredibly low demanded jobs. I think that's a doomsday scenario that just won't happen, in my opinion. Uh, Last thing they kind of talked about, and I actually go through challenges and solutions, you know, here in a bit that they struggle with, but kind of around ethics and governance of it. So you're looking at, you know, needing the appropriate guardrails in place. We want to look for bias. That's one that's easy to call out for AI models, you know, but also just kind of rules of engagement, I guess, for the system. Obviously, anything that doesn't have a I'll call it a, I guess, a brain, for lack of a better way to put it, doesn't recognize some of those guardrails that we as humans are able to see, recognize, and then make a decision on. Obviously, if you build a decision tree in, it knows, but it doesn't have the cognitive ability, unless programmed in by someone, to recognize that, for instance, I'm collecting information. All of a sudden, someone signed up for a newsletter from, I don't know, we'll call it maybe not IP address. They put their address in and it's a European citizen. And so all of a sudden we need to make sure that this citizen is treated appropriately based on what GDPR and the EU AI Act have said about data collection of AI systems, and what are kind of the rules of engagement with that individual. We have an opportunity coming up here soon to do kind of a GDPR gap assessment for a client, and not a large client by any means. They have some large customers because they're specialized in what they do, and uh their stance for a while has been, and I will say this, most you're not going to be able to get away with this anytime in the near future at this point. But essentially, their stance has been, we don't collect any European data. Well, I know you don't, but you're going to get to the point when there's going to be no choice. You're going to really just have to. And it's not even that you want to, but that you're going to have to do that. So eventually it'll get to the point, you're not going to be able to put up these guardrails anymore. So rather than put up these guardrails, these walls of blocking what information's coming in, we can put up the guardrails now so that we know when that information comes in, it's protected and it's covered. And we put the necessary safeguards and controls in place to protect us from compliance issues, but also protect the consumer from data breach and other security issues that can come with inappropriate data collection and disclosure. Uh, Adding in some of the other guardrails is, consequences for misuse of the technology. Obviously, it's easy to throw like termination, suspension, all that kind of stuff. Detecting that and then categorizing what is exactly misuse of the technology can be a little bit challenging, I think, especially for organizations that uh, are a little bit less inclined to be a very buttoned up governance structure, I'll put it. Because I mean, there's going to be instances when someone accidentally puts in information, like, a lot of that stuff I think we can kind of turn away from, try and remediate to the best we can. But if there's someone who's blatantly being malicious about it, then we can probably take some necessary steps to levy some consequences on those people. um Yeah, lastly, they talk about creating adjustable parameters for AI tool usage. I mean, you can do this with GPT, for instance. You can set it down to where it's a little bit more of a conversationalist, or if it's just raw data facts and it doesn't have any sort of human element to it per se. You can kind of adjust the slider on it. So I don't know how many tools will really have that built into it necessarily, especially the ones that we'll probably be interacting with. The ones that we're doing are not necessarily going to be prompt generators. It's going to be stuff that is able to make decisions on the back end so that we can uh, kind of move forward and execute on some of that information. I mean, obviously, you're going to need some level of human intervention in any instance in which an AI is making an automated decision. That's part of the EU AI Act. That's part of a lot of data privacy law. Is any instance in which there's an automated decision being made about a human being, there needs to be some level of human interference and interaction involved in that decision making. Now that you can make that as like a simple review process of what that automated decision is. That way you kind of cover yourself and try to eliminate some bias. I think it can be easy to mistakenly, that, like Josh shared a fun example. I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. Oh, it had, so they, accused is a strong word, but he used an example that they were accused of having bias in targeting Vietnamese people more so with a lot of their assessments and audits and other stuff that they do as part of the TDLR's processes. And it's not that they were being, I mean, this is where I'm not going to get into some of the other data that came out in the last couple of years about police, but you kind of get to an area where you're like, I don't know that there is any bias, because although you're saying that all of our audits and assessments are against one specific class of people, 90% of the population um, are Vietnamese folks that do own, I don't know, nail salons, I think it was that he was saying. So um, it's difficult to accuse something of bias whenever the entire population is leaning towards one specific demographic. Obviously, you can say, well, you probably didn't have enough data. You need to collect more. And I know that's like, we can show you the 10,000, 100,000 instances where it happened. I don't know how much more data we need until we massage it out. I mean, there's statistical ways of being able to test for bias that you can employ, and then for using that, you can make the decision of, is this population actually good to use for sampling, or should I, do I need more data, basically? Um, some of the challenges that they talk about with some solutions. I mean, with most states, I don't know if it's with every state off the top of my head. I wish I knew that, but with Texas and Kentucky as well, because I recently had a conversation with someone from a state agency there about this. Um, they're on a 2-year budget cycle, and so one of the ladies was commenting that every get the budget approved, goes through implementing it. By the time it gets implemented, they're basically 2 years behind, maybe sometimes longer, depending on how long it takes to implement the new technology. But they end up being behind. And so the best advice that they were given by the folks on the panel, essentially prioritizing the vendors that are already the DIR contracts and certificates. So, essentially, if you have that designation as a service provider, then you can kind of bypass a lot of the headache of procurement that goes on with those agencies, and you can go, right to the top of the line, essentially, and you often get preference. So that was kind of for the very specific question about challenges with 2-year budget cycles. Try to use those vendors. Now, some cases, what those vendors offer is not what they're looking for, and so they may have to go through the procurement cycle, which is a big pain. It requires that sort of approval on that biennial cycle, but for the most part, you can probably figure out one connection who's maybe they're at company A that is not a DIR vendor, but they know someone at company B, and so we can do this kind of partnership engagement to a certain degree, and then be able to provide the services through kind of another company. I'm not advocating for that. I'm just saying there's opportunity to explore being innovative despite the compliance obligations that are in place. Um, yeah, I mean, some of the other stuff they talked through, kind of change management, not changes as an application changes, but just kind of top-down changes at the organization. Making sure training is in place, having top-down advocacy for some of those new programs. Um, validating data sources if you're doing kind of implementation stuff, certificate and accreditation of the data assets, regular assessments. I mean, yeah, it was good stuff. I enjoyed the time there. I didn't really get a chance to talk to anybody because I had to jet right after, but it was a good, informative meeting, and I'm glad to have been a part of it on that day. Kind of a smaller crowd, but I'm sure that that's the typical, just due to can be a little difficult to get to the Capitol if you don't already have it on your schedule. Now, the state of Texas does have an AI council in place right now. We formed it this year, as a matter of fact, and so they'll be publishing a report at the end of the year, just kind of around general AI impacts at the state level. future of the technology for the state of Texas, kind of some guidelines and requirements on what they're expecting to be in place should state agencies choose to use it. Now, I would say if you're not a state agency, but you're planning to use it, you're not really sure where to start, the NIST AI risk management framework's good. I'm sure the state of Texas report is going to be based partly off that as well. IAPP and ISACA both have good resources as well that you can kind of base some of your framework stuff off of. IAPP would be more on the legal side. ISACA would be more on the security side. And so definitely recommend those areas if you're planning to try and implement this anytime soon. And maybe not just, if you like frameworks, you can as an individual and implement this in your own life, feel free to check those out as well. I can't say that they're designed for a consumer focus, but you might be able to take some stuff out of there and apply them to your own life to some extent. All right. I know I rambled a little bit. Like I said, this is just raw reaction kind of day. This next bit, just briefly touching on the AI Policy Act that Utah has put in place. So Utah being, I don't know if they were the first state off the top of my head. They were one of the first two. I'm pretty sure Colorado was first and Utah followed soon after. And so Utah made some smaller updates, I'll put it. This is primarily applicable to generative AI systems or synthetic content only. So think prompt generators, Claude, GPT, Copilot, other stuff that you may have come across as well, where you put in a response or you put in a prompt and it gives you a response back. And so this is primarily what that's targeting. I mean, it's trying to go. It's not. I don't necessarily think it's trying to be a bleeding edge or even cutting edge. It's just trying to get some legislation out there to make sure to keep consumers informed of when they're using these. Now, I would be shocked if someone's using it and doesn't realize they're using it. That would be wild, but I'm sure there's the edge case out there where that's been the case. I mean, so excuse me, some of the way this bill is kind of written together. Some of the highlights is it just establishes some liability for use of AI. So who's responsible for what? It establishes an Office of AI Policy, establishes AI learning laboratory program, and then the big one is that it requires the company to label its product as well as notify customers when they're using that product, kind of that disclosure piece, and then allows rulemaking authority for AI programs and regulation exemptions should those exist. And so I've got it in front of me. There's not a very long. It's not long. We got 18 pages. I mean, I guess in comparison, it's not as long, but I'm not going to go through the whole thing. The main part I'm just going to talk briefly about is section 13-2-12. So this one talks about generative AI, kind of the impact on liability for violations of the law. So the beginning of it is just kind of laying out what is used in this section, kind of a little bit of terminology. If we were to skip down to section 3 of this specific section, paragraph 3, sorry, it goes into and finally talks about this any person using a prompt or otherwise from Gen AI, the company shall clearly and conspicuously disclose to the person with whom the generative AI interacts. And then if the person asks, the person is interacting with the intelligence, if asked or prompted by the person, that the person is interacting with generative art and is not a human. So, person, if they ask, chatbot, for instance, might be considered generative AI. Are you a person? The chatbot has to say, no, I'm not a person. If it says yes, and in fact is not, we've got a violation of 13-2-12, paragraph 3. Paragraph 4 kind of goes into two parts, A and B. A person who provides the services of a regulated occupation shall prominently disclose when a person is interacting with generative. That's that notification part that we mentioned earlier. Nothing in this section permits a person to provide the services of a regulated occupation through generative AI without meeting the requirements of this regulated occupation. So not only do you have to do that, you also have to meet the requirements of whatever regulation is currently over your occupation: construction, education, healthcare, so on. It's just kind of an add-on to existing legislation. Wonder how many more add-ons are in our future for existing legislation. Part 5 talks about a disclosure described in subsection 4. So that's the part where you prominently have to disclose. This can either be provided verbally at the start of an oral exchange or conversation with the person, and or through electronic messaging before. Well, actually, it's not and or, it's and. So be looking at providing verbal. For those of you that are operating a company that falls under this purview, obviously, this is most relevant. You need to be able to provide verbal disclosure at the beginning of the interaction, and then also through electronic messaging before a written exchange happens. So I log in to Claude. It tells me I'm interacting with an AI in big bold letters. And then verbally, I mean, you can also verbally can be written in text. I mean, that's trying to cover the just kind of being more ADA compliant, where and I don't know why someone who probably can't see but they can hear, they need to know that they're interacting with a generative AI tool just as much as someone that can see is interacting with a tool. The rest of it just goes into, how the divisions is going to be administering and enforce the provisions of the section. That's what 6, 7 talks about, 8 talks about in a court action. So there's a lot more that this goes into, but as far as requirements of the organization, it's just really in that 13-2-12. The next section that was kind of amended, 13-11-4, is about deceptive act or practice by a supplier. This is one that's already pretty much, in place across the board. It just adds in, it adds in some language around artificial intelligence and generative AI. So nothing really to be overtly concerned about in the state of Utah. Hopefully you're doing all these things. If you're not, figure out how to get in touch with me and we can figure out how to make it so that you're not going to get sued by someone who has no business trying to interrupt your business. And yeah, that's pretty much it, y'all. Thanks for those of you. Sorry to keep y'all waiting, for those of you that were waiting for a new episode. I know it's been several months since then. But finally we're back and we're trying to get into a more regular cadence on this if we can. Holidays coming up will be difficult, but until next time, y'all, I will talk to you later. Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Data Privacy Party install. Hope you learned something new and can better protect your information. Like us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, and subscribe to hear more great content.